We're not forgetting about any of this, lefties. Are you listening to us? We here, I don't care what you're hearing from Republicans on Capitol Hill. We are not forgetting about shit. Do you get that? We are going to hold every one of these people accountable. And if we can't find politicians that'll do it, then we're going to find someone else. There is absolutely zero chance we are going back to normal.
I mean, what can you say to that? That's Dan Bongino, the former NRI spokesman, on his podcast, as he threatens opponents of Donald Trump with unspecified consequences and encourages, essentially, directly, vigilante violence if he doesn't get what he wants. It's kind of shocking. If you followed him for a while, it's not surprising, however. But to me, as a neutral observer, he's becoming even more unhinged, to be honest, more extreme in these threats. I've seen that arc, especially since the guilty verdict for Donald Trump. And it's not unusual right now. He's not the only one. This is Tim Pool on the Pimcast with his guest, Laura Loomer. And watch this clip. It's a little long, but see how it ends, and you'll appreciate what I'm saying.
Democrats be in jail, no question. When Donald Trump gets elected, should he start locking them up? No question. Should there be lists of Democrats that need to go to jail? 100%. And the reason for that is they've committed crimes. We need to make sure that when Donald Trump wins, we've got an attorney general, a deputy attorney general, a head of the CIA and the FBI. Kash Patel would be fantastic. We can have attorney general. There's some names floating around. And then they can start having their investigators and the feds issuing subpoenas, pulling up evidence, and with real evidence, bring them to judges for warrants. Then these people can spend three years of their lives fighting tooth and nail for the crime against the government for crimes they committed, and we can prove. Yeah. And the reason why we put them on trial is that we can show the whole world we will uncover what you've done. We will make sure everyone knows, and you will be held accountable for it.
Not just jail, they should get the death penalty. You know, we actually used to have the punishment for treason in this country.
Yeah, the video actually cuts off as Laura Loomer says we should actually execute Democrats. I guess they knew they were getting into dangerous territory and kind of giving away the game because they cut it off. It's a very precarious place, honestly. And where does all this stem from right now? Where does all of it stem from? Well, this guy.
They're deranged. I talk about the enemy on the outside and the enemy from within. So you have Russia, you have China. But if you have a smart president, you always handle him. Quite easily, actually. We have a lot of advantages. But the enemy from within, they are doing damage to this country.
Yeah. The language of authoritarians coming from Donald J. Trump, convicted felon, and current frontrunner to be the nominee of the Republican Party for president. You know, I say it often. This is the language I heard in Iraq with tales of Saddam Hussein and his victims. As I ate meals, I don't know if you know what I did. I did, in addition to being a pilot, it always gives me trouble because I was a pilot, but actually what I did in Northern Iraq in the first tour in Iraq, once we arrived in Northern Iraq, I was our guy that did all our civil affairs. So I ended up actually being the guy who controlled a large swath of the territory around Q West Air Base in Northern Iraq. I was the first guy of a few of us that went out there and regularly spent at least 3 or 4 days a week visiting villages, sitting down in mud huts and farming villages in the plains of the Nineveh Plains, eating sheep, finally chicken. I got so sick of sheep, they started making me chicken. Talking about life under dictatorship. And it really changed my life. I mean that in every way. Literally, my life changed from that experience. And they told me of families next door disappearing in the night. They told me of villages being raided based on the tip of a jealous neighbor. We even fell victim of it ourselves. It wasn't just under Saddam. When one of my Iraqi partners, Dr. Muhammad, who was later executed, was actually arrested during my first tour by an American infantry unit out of my sector, who had said one of their villagers had implicated Dr. Muhammad in a raid or an ambush on their vehicles, on one of their vehicles. So they actually came into our sector, my sector, and arrested my Iraqi partner on the tip of an Iraqi who was lying. I had to actually go to our jail and demand his, use my rank, if you will, to get him out. Those are things that happen in authoritarian society. And if you don't think we're heading for it, I got really bad news for you. Watch those clips again. Now, why do I sound the alarm, specifically me? Well, simply put, I'm on the target list. If you're new, you may not have heard that I've been sued in a ridiculous lawsuit by none other than the disgraced former General Michael Flynn. He's demanding $150 million, originally over 3 tweets from 2 years ago. In our filings back and forth, they realized, one, they actually misinterpreted one of the tweets. They actually spelled it wrong, if you will. So 2 of them went away. But I'm still on the hook, hanging in federal court for 6 months over a lawsuit from one of the most infamous people in our country right now over a single tweet and the tenths of a single word, is versus was, and he wants $150 million. Now, will he get that? No. Will he win? Almost zero chance. It doesn't matter. The goal is to tie me up with lawfare, which he talks about all the time, to tie me up in legal bills. I'm still paying lawyers this whole time. Even as the federal court ghosts us, I'm still paying legal bills and holding my life in balance. I'll be honest. I actually went out looking for a day job for a while, got to make a living. And I was rejected multiple times. What company would hire someone with a $150 million lawsuit hanging over their head? That's the goal. The goal is to make our lives miserable. And that's without violence. How else do I know? Well, they told me. I get regular messages from their followers, especially lately since the conviction. Very direct messages telling me how they're going to go. I've been doxxed not once, but twice. Luckily, it's all the wrong addresses. I had local police recently, about 2 months ago, chase off twice mysterious blacked out pickup trucks idling outside my house on my residential street, on the only house in that area. Allow me to show an exhibit for you. Now, here's an exhibit we're going to throw up on screen for you that tells you the story. This picture on the screen was taken by me at the Missouri Republican Party booth at Kirkwood, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis, a very well-off suburb of St. Louis. Their Green Tree Festival, which I've been going to since I was a child because I'm originally from there. I don't live there now. This is a graphic of Donald Trump's mugshot with the word retribution written across it. If you see the picture, it's carefully, that's the prominent display at the Republican Party of Missouri's booth at a family festival with, I'm not kidding you, kids getting their faces painted across the booth, across the sidewalk from them. That was the idea of the Missouri GOP, that's what they wanted to show as a representation of their party. Donald Trump's mugshot with the word retribution written across it. And I assure you, the message was for me and people like me. If you're a fan of This American Life on NPR, which is an incredible show, they're scheduled to actually run a story this weekend about my experience, as well as several other opponents of Donald Trump and friends of mine who you'll recognize, who face likely retaliation, revenge if he gains power, and probably even if he doesn't. So, get the message yet? I have. It's funny how people will say, oh, you're being paranoid. I don't think I am. So, in light of all this, I thought it was a time we actually talked about political violence. It's rising specter in our democracy. I have an actual expert on the topic to join us, and I wish I had a good news, happy story for this week, but I don't. I think there will be some good news because he's a smart guy. But what I have is a story that will shock you into understanding just how real the stakes are for this election for many Americans. It sure as hell just isn't an inconvenience and mean tweets. We are not facing more mean tweets. We're facing the very real possibility of political violence in the United States of America like we haven't since the Civil War. So with that, welcome to On Democracy with FP Wellman. I am your host, Fred Wellman, here on the MeidasTouch Network and wherever you get your podcast. Hang on to your hats. This is going to be an interesting show. Let's get on with it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As I mentioned, I am Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy with FP Wellman. You're in the right place. Obviously, a very serious opening. Told you about some very serious stuff going on in the world. And that's what we have to do this week. I've got an incredible guest to talk about this. You know, we are facing a real challenge in our country surrounding political violence. It's only going to get worse. It's only gotten worse since Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies. So I thought it was a great time for us to flip the schedule a little bit and talk to an expert. So Dr. Garen Wintemute is an emergency physician, one of the nation's leading firearm violence researchers and policy experts, director of the Violence Prevention Research Program at the University of California, Davis. Most recently, sir, is the recipient of the Jess Krause Award for a major research paper he authored on political violence. The paper, Views of Democracy and Society and Support for Political Violence in the USA, Findings from a Nationally Representative Survey, is what we're going to talk about, was published in the Injury Epidemiology magazine in September 23. Garen, welcome to the show, man. I can't thank you enough. For those at home, I called them yesterday. and God bless you. Yeah, I can do that. So welcome to the MeidasTouch Network, sir. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
We, I opened with that montage of clips from just last week. Donald Trump and his most extreme supporters promising retribution, likely extrajudicial means against his perceived enemies. You had that incredible study in September last year that concluded that a small but concerning proportion of the population consider violence, including lethal violence, to be usually or always justified in advancing their political objectives. I read those words and I can't believe it. Prevention efforts should proceed urgently based on the best available evidence. So we're going to talk about all that. It's been 9 months, though, sir, since you published that paper. Have current events worried you in light of what you learned?
In 2 words, oh, yes.
Okay.
The data we're going to talk about are from 2022. It's an annual survey, and the 2024 questionnaire is actually in the field right now.
Wow.
So we'll have 2024 updates by the end of the summer. But 2022 was a run-up to an election, and we have the same thing here this year, except the stakes are higher. And it's a reasonable inference from the current rhetoric, given our findings, that things are worse now than they were 2 years ago, and we'll talk about 2 years ago. We'll have the answers in a few months.
Well, that's scary. I'm glad we're having new view before the election too. It's really important, and the study was motivated by 5 conditions and their apparent convergence, which creates that potential for greater violence and risk in the future. Those 5 things, what did you see? What were those 5 things? I know the first one is striking rise in actual violence, particularly in firearm violence. What were the other scene setters for you, the 5 elements?
So the rise in violence was almost without precedent in our history. The largest, both in absolute terms and relative terms, increases in violence that we'd ever seen in our history. The other one that hasn't been mentioned, we've talked about rhetoric and stuff already, is there was at the same time during the pandemic years an unprecedented rise in firearm purchasing. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, I do research on firearm violence, and one of the things we know is buy a lot of guns, on balance, down the road, bad things happen. Yeah. And the question that surfaced for us in 2022, everybody should remember their experience of 2022, is what happens when you take a society that is increasingly angry, increasingly mistrustful, having less respect than ever for its institutions or its own future, and you throw a bunch of guns into the mix. We are now living through the period of time that will give us the answer to that question.
Yeah, and I am a Iraq veteran, right? And something I say often, I had written an op-ed with some fellow veterans about 4 years ago about how those of us who served in places like Iraq, which was awash in guns, and what that means. A simple fight ends up being, I call it excuse my language, the fuck you, bang, bang. Right? Sort of where fights used to be chest bumping and run away, in a place awash with guns, like I saw in the streets of Baghdad, the streets of Mosul where I served. That's what happens, right? And that's exactly what you saw in your study, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. To talk about political violence and just to follow up on an observation you made, we asked people, and we've asked every year, do you think political violence is justified in general as a means of problem solving? And then we asked, well, how about for this specific objective and this one and this one and this one, a whole list? And in 2022, one person in three thought that violence was usually or always justified to satisfy at least one of those political objectives, or to advance at least one of them. And for people who said yes to one, on average, they said yes to 6.
Whew. Okay. And what was the prevalent of those 17? I mean, was there like one of the list that was those causes that they thought was the number one?
No, to be honest, it was about the same. Okay. Support for each of them. But let me give you some examples. Some were very narrowly focused. Is violence justified to put Donald Trump back in the White House? About 5% said yes, usually or always. And remember, this is 2022. I'm sorry, to put him back in the White House this year.
Oh my goodness.
In 2022.
Yeah.
Others were sort of designed as dog whistles to the right. Is violence justified to preserve a culture based on Western European values? Others were much more, as we thought, balanced to preserve the American way of life that I believe in. Right. Everybody gets to fill in their own meaning. But there was about 5% support across the board for each one. But there were 17 of them, and added up, and it turned out to be 1 in 3 American adults thought violence was usually or always justified for at least one political purpose.
Well, that's terrifying. And one of the things we talk about a lot is there's a lot of polls that come out, and one of the things we hang on as political I'm an operative is, as a matter of fact, a lot of candidates are running for office on both sides of the spectrum, saying that democracy is in danger, that a large majority of Americans believe our democracy is in danger. And I often, and frankly, your study did this back in September, where I said, yeah, but that means different things to different people, doesn't it? Right? I mean, you saw that right up front, that preserving our democracy means something different to you and me than perhaps someone who's very MAGA oriented. What did you see in your study on that?
So you're right. We actually used a question that had been used in other surveys to see if our results were going to be comparable. And yes, a large majority of Americans see democracy as being under threat. It does mean different things to different people. In subsequent surveys, we've been exploring that. And there appear to be, we don't have the analysis finished here, but there appear to be at least two camps.
Okay.
The people who see democracy as under threat because full participation is being denied. There's an effort to restrict voting and so forth. There are people who see democracy under threat because they've held power, and the structures that allowed them to hold power are being threatened by an effort to be more inclusive. So they see a threat too, but what those two groups see as a threat is quite different.
Yeah, and that is so defining in this election. Like I said, I've seen candidates on both sides. I'm working with a congressional race right now where both candidates from the Democrat and Republican side their number one issue is preserve democracy, and that means so many different things. I mean, we do have to define that, and of course, how they defend that is another way. It's kind of scary, actually. But I thought it was interesting too, as we go towards the violence side of it. Is earlier in the study, some of the conclusions, you asked very direct questions about some of the more scary things, the great replacement theory, for example, and the belief in QAnon. Where did that play into all this? For example, great replacement and the QAnon, and we know QAnon's a major issue. I actually spoke to the woman who runs the Democratic Party of North Carolina. Of course, the woman running for superintendent, the nominee for state superintendent, is a very big QAnon believer. What did you find yourself when you asked direct questions about those beliefs? I mean, what kind of numbers are we facing?
Yep. So again, for QAnon, we used questions that had been used before so that we could compare our results to others. And we found about the same thing, which was that about 1 adult in 9 agreed strongly or very strongly with the central tenet of the QAnon delusion complex, that being that our social institutions and government are controlled by satanic pedophiles who traffic children for sex. Which is, to take an aside, I've drafted these questionnaires, and when I put that question in, my colleagues here said, you can't ask that in a questionnaire, you just can't. and my response was, well, we have to, because it's out there, and oh, by the way, other people already have. This isn't our new question. Is that how you
engineered it? A lot of it was that, is you drew from existing studies. It sounds like that was a big part of it, so you could bring it together in one place. But these are hard questions, and they don't usually come from the academic world, do they?
That's correct. They come from public opinion polling.
Okay.
And yes, we drew where we could from existing polls, but most of what we did explored territory that simply has not been explored before. I had to draft the great replacement theory question, where we found higher levels of support than we expected for great replacement theory.
Wow.
I also drafted a question, and I was sitting exactly where I am right now when I drafted it, and I can still remember the physical chill I experienced when I drafted the question. It wasn't a question, it was an assertion, and you were asked to agree with it. Having a strong leader is more important for America than having a democracy. And I put that in because that's a pretty good litmus test question for authoritarianism. And we found substantial levels of agreement with that statement, which we've explored further in additional surveys. And there is this won't surprise anybody who's watching or listening, there is a very strong pro-authoritarian stream in American politics at the moment. Yeah. It is very strongly associated with not just support for violence, but with personal willingness to commit violence.
Ooh. Those are two very dangerous places. And pulling on that thread a little bit more, I did notice that you did say in it that it varied by status, and age as well, right? So what's the thread there between that willingness of violence, that willingness for authoritarianism, as well as like social, economic, and age? Were those factors as well?
Yes. So I think not surprisingly to anybody, and I'll anchor here, support for violence for political violence went down with age. It was higher in general among young people than old people.
Yeah.
It went down with education. It went down with income. Those statements would be true about support for or use of violence in general.
Yeah.
So political violence is simply reflecting a larger experience. In other cases, we found we very deliberately explored. I'm a public health guy. You want to know who the groups are at high risk are. We very deliberately explored variation in support along a bunch of different axes. Party affiliation, support higher among Republicans than Democrats, and very much in particular, support higher among MAGA Republicans in our survey, which we identified as people who voted for Donald Trump, identified as Republicans, voted for Donald Trump, and denied the results of the 2020 election, which is a reasonable working definition.
Yep.
And we identified a number of other high-risk groups, which from a public health point of view is an important objective because it allows you to tailor your interventions.
There we go. Yeah. And I guess that's not all surprising from just common sense. I think that's what I liked about this study too, is for many of us who've been in this fight for as long as we have, I mean, technically years, but for officially as a professional, if you will, for 4 years when I joined the Lincoln Project, these were things we knew, right? There was a lot of sort of, a good feel, like a feeling of confirmation, that you will, and justification that we had been saying these things and sounding alarms, and then you managed to find the right questions to ask that kind of shaped it for us, and that was kind of concerning. You know, it's been mentioned. You know, we are facing this election, so you've got this out now. We're seeing more and more of that election. So let's go back to that election denial part, right? That third step. What we're seeing now, of course, is there more and more of that. Like almost the entire Republican Party, all the elected officials, if they don't deny the election results, are committed to that belief, or at least expressing that belief. Do you think that's going to move more the numbers? I mean, is it worrisome that is going to affect more people and grow that number of those who are, you know, infected with the idea of violence?
I think that's likely. It was interesting that in 2023, the year after the survey that we've been mostly talking about, we saw a slight decrease in agreement with the idea that the election was stolen, but only slight. I fully expect that decrease to vanish and be replaced by maybe even higher levels of agreement with the big lie about the theft of the 2020 election this year than previously.
You know, it's interesting to me too. And then, of course, the biggest change we've seen, the reason I called you, is with the conviction of Donald Trump is now a convicted felon, and a complete denial of that, and the attack on our judicial system. I guess comments, I don't know how you're going to address, have you thought of addressing that in the new study? Because to me, it says this undermining of our judicial system is a huge step in the direction of the idea that political violence is okay. Because the one thing we had was a judicial system that worked for us, right? We could say, and I go back to that Dan Bongino clip or the Tim Pool clip at the beginning, where Pool and Laura Loomer were saying, well, you know, we got to arrest them, we got to make them suffer for 3 years, and then Loomer just pops in, and they should be executed. You know, I mean, so you know what I mean. So it's a very big shift, I think, but with the conviction of Donald Trump, that suddenly the idea of our judicial system not working it leads to extrajudicial means, doesn't it?
Yes. So let me talk as a researcher for just a second.
Sure.
The questionnaire has been in the field for a couple of weeks. It'll be in the field for another week or so. And that verdict comes down right in the middle of the period of time.
Right.
So I happened to be online looking at the New York Times when the verdicts were announced and watched the 34 counts roll in. By the time count 34 had rolled in, I was thinking, oh, wow, we're going to have to separate our responses into those that came before today and those that came today or after. But what that will do for us is, whether we find a difference or not, it will allow us to assess the immediate impact on within hours of support for political violence of those verdicts coming down. So we don't even have the data yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing what we find out.
Dumb luck in research. You don't get that very often. You know, you're usually planning ahead. You know, that's good. That's timing is everything. That's why I say that's where I am, because timing is everything. It's a good spot to take a break. We got some great sponsors this week, as always, and we'll just see them. And then I just want to get back to this conversation. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And then on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs, and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workouts, sleep, and even your stress management. Now, all you have to do is breathe into this device, your Lumen, first thing in the morning. You'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it, before or after workouts and meals. So that way you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. Now, look, after 20 years in the Army, being starved in Ranger School, living on combat rations while deployed, I've had to learn really well how my metabolism is my body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into the fuel that keeps you going. And honestly, guys, as I've aged, I've become more increasingly aware of how I must balance my exercise and diet. Our metabolism is the center of everything our body does. Optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits for me, including helping with my weight management, improving energy levels, getting better fitness results, and better sleep. And I really love how Lumen gives me recommendations to improve my metabolic health every single day. Now, look, I've been on a macro management diet program before. I've tried all different kinds of techniques. I learned the key to metabolic health is through these many years is something called metabolic flexibility. And that's where Lumen has really helped me. It refers to your body's ability to efficiently switch between using different fuel sources like carbs and fats. There are preferred times to use each and how well you can switch places you on the metabolic flexibility spectrum. Now, after getting to know you through your breath, Lumen gives you a metabolic flex score that can track and improve upon each day instead of a set macro number you use without changing. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me and use code FRED to get $100 off your Lumen. That is LUMEN.me and use FRED at checkout for $100 off. I highly recommend it. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring our episode. If you're like me, you understand the pain of finding out what to wear each day. I mean, most clothes I have are uncomfortable, never actually the size I really am, and not to mention how much time is wasted trying to find a good outfit. And when you do have a good fit, you can only wear it for a few hours. We have to change for an important meeting or dinner, find a new outfit. Now, everyone wants to dress well at all times because, simply put, it's a confidence booster, even for men like me. Men's closets were due for a radical overhaul and reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man, and here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion with the commuter collection, which offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, and polos. You've never have to worry about what to wear when you have the Rhone commuter collection. With Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can just ditch it all in the dry cleaner or ditch the dry cleaner completely, put it all in your own washing machine yourself. I'm obsessed with the Rhone commuter collection. We're on the move a lot, whether it's I'm catching a flight or I'm going to a meeting or whatever. The Rhone commuter collection has never let me down so far. The commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to head to Rhone.com/Fred. Use promo code FRED to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/Fred and use code FRED. It's time for you to find your corner office of comfort. Check out our sponsor, Rhone. I hope you'll buy some outfits today. And we're back. I literally took the liberty of telling the good doctor that I ran out of questions. So, it's just, we're so down that rabbit hole. Let's talk about that Civil War aspect. You mentioned it, that the idea of a Civil War. And it's funny you mentioned it because that does tie into that question I mentioned earlier of what we see as the version of democracy, like the danger to democracy. Tell me about the idea of a Civil War and what you're finding, your findings in that.
Yep. So the stimulus is that people who study civil conflict around the globe, whose expertise is primarily in what goes on in other countries, have developed some standardized ways of predicting risk for civil war in other countries. And they've taken those approaches and turned them on the United States and gone, oh my God, we are a lot further down the path toward open conflict than we thought we were. So in the first questionnaire, we asked people whether they agreed with the statement, in the next few years, there will be civil war in the United States. And just boom, about 15%, about 1 in 7-ish of adults in the United States agreed strongly or very strongly with that statement. And another 25 to 30% agreed at least somewhat. So we're hitting 40% of adults in 2022 thinking there just might be civil war coming. And we were taken aback by that. Yeah. So we asked the question again in 2023, which was not an election year. Yeah. And good news, so the agreement with that idea had fallen pretty substantially, but not an election year, from about 14, 15% to about 6%. But In 2023, we also asked people their opinion of this statement. The United States needs a civil war to set things right. Another chill as I drafted.
Yeah.
And in 2023, last year, of the people who still thought civil war was coming, almost 40% said we need one.
Whew.
And this year, the questionnaire that's in the field now, we've kind of gone to town on that. It's an election year. There's a movie for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So we've repeated the two items that I just mentioned, but we've also asked, which side would you be on? Let's say it's a right-wing insurgency. Whose side are you on? A left-wing insurgency. Whose side are you on? What would you do if civil conflict erupted? With options everywhere from I would leave the country to I would be a combatant to I would kill a combatant on the other side to I would kill a non-combatant on the other side. We have asked those questions, don't have the answers yet, and hope to by September.
It's not often I'm stunned into silence on this show. And we had these conversations. You know, I'm very public on my online personality. I have these comments sent to me, by the way. I have, it's not a day goes by I don't get a DM from someone saying you're next or we're coming for you, or somebody sends me my address just to remind me. I've had pickup trucks. I had a pickup truck parked outside my vehicle, my house, not a month and a half ago. Police had to chase them off. So for many of us, these are very real ideas. And I go back to my Iraq experience as you talk. When you talk about 40% of us walk, let's be honest. The insurgency in Iraq, the number of people who actually conducted violence was a single-digit number or less, right? Even in Afghanistan, of the population. When you talk, there's people saying they're willing to conduct violence at that scale. That's bigger than our insurgency in Iraq. Okay, you know, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the scale of that, is that your impression as well?
Yes. Let me skip forward to a part of the study that we haven't talked about in answering that question.
I'd love that.
So we asked people a bunch of questions about, do you support political violence, in essence? If they supported it, we asked questions about their personal willingness to get involved. And you and I can come back to that in just a moment. But at the end of the survey, we asked everybody, regardless of what they thought about political violence, and regardless of whether they owned guns or not, which we also asked about, we said, think into the future. And we asked this in 2022 and 3 and 4. How likely do you think it is that in the future, in a setting where you think political violence is justified, you will make use of a gun in any of the following ways? And that went from I'll be armed to I'll carry openly so everybody knows I'll be armed to I'll threaten somebody to I will shoot somebody. Mm-hmm. Just over 1% of the respondents, and that's a very small percentage. So as a researcher, I'm very nervous about attaching much reliability. But just over 1% of the general population said they thought it was very or extremely likely that they would shoot somebody. Now, to extrapolate, we're talking about a sample of, for this particular survey, about 9,000 people, but it extrapolates to 250 million adults, 260 million adults. So it's roughly 2.5 million people per percentage point. Wow. So to go way out on a limb here, my statistician friends are cringing as I say this.
They're not here.
that extrapolates to at least a large number, 2.5 million, but probably less than that, of people who are at least in a survey willing to contemplate a high likelihood of shooting somebody to advance a political objective in the next few years.
Wow. And that has to be taken seriously, and there's no way not to, right? I mean, and we talk about that a lot. You got right to where I wanted to go next, which was the proportion from your gun violence experience and your you know, I'm a gun owner, you know, I'm a soldier, for God's sake, and I'm a former soldier, you know. I guess with all this, and as I gotta let you go soon. You know, I did mention it's been 9 months since you published this study. You've got the other one going on now, as you mentioned. Just won the Krauss Award for it, as I mentioned. I'm thrilled for that. We're 6 months from another elections. What do you suppose more people? I guess the question, I have a larger question. You may not be able to answer it because you're, why do you think so many people are asleep to this issue? I guess it really doesn't it feel like people are kind of asleep at the wheel about how very serious this is? I mean, for me as a veteran of combat, again, I did 4 combat tours at Desert Storm. I did 3 tours in Iraq. I was there at the beginning. I saw the arc of the insurgency all the way to 2008 was my last tour, where we were getting rockets lobbed over from Sadr City. I've seen how this goes in my life, and I see so many of my fellow citizens who just still can't believe that this is a possibility. What do you see there, sir?
Yep. So as a firearm violence researcher, it reminds me of part of the universal reaction to mass shootings.
Yeah.
Didn't think it could happen here. Are you kidding me? It can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
So for this, as for other aspects of violence, doesn't matter who you are, where you live, what your demographics are, what your background is, you have skin in this game.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And from my perspective, one of the reasons I said yes quickly when you called me yesterday or emailed me was, I'm trying to get the message out, and here I am getting the message out. Thank you very much. But here's the good news that I take away from both rounds of the surveying. Yes, people are asleep, but most people rejected political violence over and over again. Yeah. Not just once, but all of those specific objectives. I could see them getting angry as they answered the survey. No, not for this or for that or for that or for that. And most of the people who said, yes, in theory, I would support political violence, about 70% of them said, but I wouldn't want to get my own hands dirty.
Yeah.
So those 2 findings, to me, point the way to a solution.
Yeah.
One of the things we know about people's behavior is other people can influence it. People pay attention to what their friends and neighbors and coworkers and the barber or the stylist, the clergy person, what those people say. And the objective, the obligation for all of the rest of us, those asleep and those awake, is if we're asleep, wake up. But we need to get the message out there, all of us who reject violence, that we reject violence, that it is not the way we solve political problems in the United States. And if enough of us say it publicly, loudly, and in private conversations and in all the ways we can, that, I think, will act as a deterrent to engaging in that behavior. And I say that because we know that one of the most powerful ways to change people's health behavior in general is to invoke the kind of network that I've just mentioned.
Yeah.
If all those people are saying, don't smoke, it's easier not to smoke. If all those people are saying, don't pick up a gun to influence an election, people are going to be less inclined to pick up a gun to influence an election.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we talk about then the strays, the ones who aren't going to listen, there's still an imaginable number where our law enforcement and our executive leadership can handle it, right? It's obviously not, any violence is bad, any death is bad, but we're not talking about so much that will overwhelm our abilities to stop it, I guess. Hopefully.
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's no one strategy that's going to fix all this. So we need to create, we need very quickly, because there's not much time. We need to create a culture of rejection of violence to solve political problems. And for people who aren't amenable to that sort of approach, yes, we've got law enforcement, we've got other ways of identifying and interdicting, incapacitating people who are hell-bent on provoking revolution.
Yeah, and it must be stopped. I guess my last question then too is, in the larger picture, there, and we kind of answered a little bit, but there does feel like there's a momentum right now, as you said. As I show, those clips are so startling. All the clips I showed at the beginning from recent, it was just a sampling, right? So there's sort of a momentum, it feels like, in some ways, towards this violence. I mean, have other places on this, because we're not the first ones going on this ride, and it comes up. I was talking to my partner, and she was like, we always talk about what if we'd been in Germany in 1930, could we stop? Has there been success elsewhere in stopping this train? And does that give us a clue? And I try to end the show on a positive note, but it's been really hard on this one. I mean, is there a way to stop this train? You kind of hinted at it, I guess.
Yeah, let's end on a positive note.
I love that.
We talked earlier about the experts who look at conflict other places and then looked at the United States and got very concerned about how far down the road we are.
Yeah.
Those same experts are also experts in how you change the trajectory of a country that's sliding toward violence. And their general recommendations for solutions, not one size fits all. The U.S. is not like Eastern Europe, let's say, but their general recommendations apply here. And one of them is the one we just talked about. Yeah. So for those of us who doom scroll, yes, it seems as though there's this unopposed flood of information.
Right.
We're sliding towards violence. And I agree. That's precisely my point. Where is the opposing flood of information about people who are saying no to violence?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to promote today, is that flood.
I love it. This is the place for it. The Midas we call ourselves are those people, right? And we do want to stop it. And I try. I have my own life, who is a person who's got a crosshair on them. Obviously, there's I've had these private discussions with professionals who do this for a living and protect people like me. You know, I've been in the crosshair for about 4 years, and it is important. I think we speak out and say, I will not participate in that. Even a guy like me, I have obviously weapons to defend myself, but I have no intention of using them offensively or otherwise. This is just not who we are. I defended this country. I gave my entire adult life and frankly my physical health and even mental health to defend the very values that say we will not resort to violence in America. Our democracy is above that. That's where we started, and that's not where we end. Well, I know you've got a seminar to teach and everything else, so I mean, I can't thank you enough for this conversation and how important it is. What should we expect in the coming months? I guess you got your new survey coming out, and where can people find out more about your work? I know where I found it. We'll put the website up on, but can you tell us more, sir?
Perfect. So every time we have a study come out, we send out a release to the media.
Great.
If anybody would like to get copies of our research, they can go to our website. Everything you and I have talked about today and much more has been published, at least as working papers, and all of those are freely accessible. Nothing is behind a paywall.
I loved that, by the way, because sometimes I was actually, I'm not gonna lie to you, as I was researching for the show, I was like, oh my God, the whole paper's here. Thank God. Usually they're paywalled.
This work will never go behind a paywall. That's
Amazing.
Part of the point.
Amazing. And thank you to UC Davis. I mean, honestly, we have to plug your university. I mean, it's impressive that they've dedicated themselves to this, that you guys have become world leaders in this. And I learned a lot in the process of getting ready to speak to you. And today, I mean, I've shockingly learned a lot. So thank you for the work you do and how important it is. I appreciate you coming on here to give voice to our concerns and give us some, in the end, good news. I think we do have to step up and fight. And I'm so glad that you're in the fight, sir.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Have a great day. Good luck today.
All right. Same to you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Yeah. You know, if you watch the show regularly, God, I hope you do. And by the way, thank you for those who do. I cannot believe the messages I get and the comments on our videos, both on our channel, the On Democracy podcast channel on YouTube, and the MeidasTouch. I think last week we had several thousand comments, and I read most of them when I can, even the mean ones. It's fine. I can't thank you enough for the support. This is a very serious topic, as I said in the intro. It's a very serious topic, as you heard in the research. It's a very serious topic for all of us. And I hope you're getting the perspective how high the stakes are. And they're not just horse race. They're not mean tweets. They're not who's going to have the best tax policy. You know, I tweet often about it. You know, the fact is, and this is, I'm joking, of course, but, you know, honestly, at this point, they could weaken at Bernie's Joe Biden for all I give a shit, okay? They could prop his ass up as long as he's got good people like he does now working for him, because you know why? He's not a convicted felon who wants to kill his fellow Americans or throw them in jail. Or his followers want to create extrajudicial punishment. Because if politicians won't do it, they'll find somebody who will. That's a quote from Dan Bongino himself. If we can't find politicians to seek retribution, we will find people who do. Who will they be? And who will be the target? And it won't just be me. Okay? So, very serious topic this week. Why you see we do this, what we do. Why you see we have this topic is that the whole show is called On Democracy. Why I'm involved in projects like the Forgotten Democrats. Because we need to take back the House of Representatives. We need to take back state houses. We need to ensure that these guys cannot take power and execute these means through legal means. And as the good doctor said, we can fight this and prevent it from happening. Because I assure you, a Donald Trump DOJ and a Donald Trump FBI aren't going to do it. They just aren't. He's already promised he won't. He's going to clean house. And they won't be on our side. So check out Forgotten Democrats, for example. It's a great organization I'm the national chairman for. We are ramping. It's our very first year. We're still figuring things out. But most important thing, the bottom line is, if you give a donation to Forgotten Democrats, if you join on a monthly basis or a one-time shot, that money will go directly to candidates this fall. Democratic nominees for Congress this fall. Not us. It's going to be a bathtub model. The people who need the money most are going to get it first. It's going to go to candidates. We have a special FEC earmark just for that purpose. If you join Forgotten Democrats, you get to hear from me more. You also get to see me a little bit more with town halls. But the most important fact, the only thing that matters, frankly, is your donation to Forgotten Democrats will be distributed amongst multiple Democratic nominees for Congress. to ensure they have the money they need to get out the vote, to support their elections, because that matters. We must win this fall. We must win this fall. It is a very real possibility we couldn't, we might not. We must take that seriously. We're up against a 34 convicted felon, and nobody seems to give a damn that's the case. So put your money where your mouth is, volunteer for local campaigns, step out in the street, wave a damn flag. As the good doctor said, talk to your neighbors, talk to your family members you're afraid may actually participate in this scary stuff. We have the power to stop it in its tracks, but we must act. And it is more than just tweeting. It is more than just watching our show, which, by the God, I love you doing it. Share it, like, subscribe, leave me a comment. We can stop this movement, but it's going to take all of us. And I know you've got it in you. I was a nobody. I'm a nobody still. I mean, let's be honest. I'm just a dude who lives in St. Louis. Just a dude who got lucky to have a microphone and get a chance to talk to y'all. But I'm no different than everybody else in this audience. We can change our country. It's just going to take all of us. There is no small part to play. And with that hopeful note, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors. I can't wait to see you again next week. If you've missed them, we are at the point, I think we're at 20 now of our In the Hot Seats interviews with incredible candidates across the country. I did 2 interviews last week, 3 this week. Actually, I've done 3. I've got incredible ones lined up. I get to talk to Angela also Brooks in Maryland and a number of other important candidates. My good friend Lisa Blunt Rochester in Delaware. There are so many great interviews. We've actually created a master thread of all of our interviews on the On Democracy Pod Twitter handle. That's On Democracy Pod, at On Democracy Pod Twitter handle. We created a master thread with links to every one of our In the Hot Seat videos. It's pinned to the top of our profile. So if you want to see all the videos in one place, just go to Twitter, On Democracy Pod. I'd love you to follow us there anyways. You can see every single incredible interview we've done with candidates you've heard of, candidates you haven't. So thanks for joining us here at On Democracy. Thanks for joining us on the MeidasTouch Network. We can't do this without you. See you soon.